What is up, everybody? We have another game with the black pieces against Anna's chess 645 from Palestine, rated 1564. He opens up with 1e4, controlling the center, best by test. We played d6, keeping him guessing as to what system we might be going for. White plays e4, controlling the whole center with the beautiful duo of pawns, the ideal pawn center. We're going to respond by developing a minor piece with a threat on the pawn in the center. It makes a lot of sense. White's going to develop his knight minor piece towards the center and defend the pawn. Makes a lot of sense. We are going to go into a Philidor and play e5, attacking the pawn in the center. White takes our pawn. What does this threaten? Well, to be up a pawn, we have to take it back. This opens up the line for the queens. White takes our queen. We must recapture back, losing castling rights. White goes knight f3. Now this is the queen trade line of the Philidor, and knight f3 looks like the most natural move for white to play because he develops a minor piece and attacks a pawn. How could this be bad? It's actually not the best move, so I'm happy to see it. It's a common inaccuracy, but it looks totally natural. It looks like it's the best move, so there's that. So anyway, he's attacking this pawn with the knight. We probably don't want to lose the pawn. So let's defend it, is what I'm getting at. You can defend it with the bishop, you can defend it with the knight. I'm going to defend it with the bishop. This also prepares long castling if I want it. No, it doesn't. What am I saying? I just moved my king. It does not prepare long castling. It just looks like that. This is the king side. This is short castle. It just looks like long castle because I moved my king over. I'm bugging. So anyway, he goes knight g5. What does this threaten? I need to get in the game. I need to lock in. It threatens my pawn with this fork. So I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to defend the pawn with my bishop and develop a piece at the same time. So he takes my bishop. What does it threaten? Well, I have to recapture, obviously. So now I have this pawn structure, but it's actually quite solid, defending the center, and gives my nice king a home on e7. We saw this in another speedrun video, very similar position. So white goes bishop g5, and what does this threaten? It just pins the knight, but the knight wasn't really going anywhere. What's the drawback? I mean, I'll gladly take his bishop if he wants to trade, but for now I'm just going to continue developing. I'm going to put my knight to d7. It supports the center, it supports the knight, and it can't be kicked by the b pawn. Whereas if you put it on c6, it could be kicked. So white castle's long. What does this threaten? Puts a little pressure on the d file, but no big deal. What's the drawback? No real drawback. It's a decent move. So now I'm going to get my king out of this alignment and also connect my rooks. And now my king supports everything, and the rooks touch each other. So he goes knight b5. What does this threaten? Well, he can't take here, so he's threatening, I guess, to capture the bishop. If he captures the bishop, we have to recapture the pawn. He has one attacker on this. It's hard for him to add more attackers, so I'm not really going to address that threat per se. I am going to put the question to the bishop and see what he wants to do. And same thing with the knight. I'm going to question these pieces and see, like, what are you really doing? So again, he moves back, but my knight's pinned, but I can break the pin if I go here. And my knight's attacking his knight, his pawn. When he moved his knight away, one of the drawbacks was that I didn't mention was that it undefends the pawn. So now that he goes here, I'm going to kick it again so I can unpin my knight, and now I can take his pawn. So I'm just going to take his pawn. And this hits the bishop, as well as defends my bishop, which is kind of funny. So he takes our piece. We have to, at the very least, capture. Well, maybe you could even capture the bishop, but I don't want to calculate. So if we capture the knight, with the knight, this pawn's still protected. If we capture it with the pawn, we kind of fix our pawns a little bit, but then let's say he can't save his bishop. Let's say he tries to just develop somewhere. I guess I could put a rook on the F file. Yeah, let's just take with the pawn and support this way. Solid enough. Now I can move this knight somewhere because the pawn is a good defender. I have this nice block of pawns in the center and he has nothing. So if we consider this the center, I'm clearly doing well. If we consider this the extended center, I'm clearly doing well. And if we consider this the center, I'm doing well. So I meant this. So no matter how you look at the center, I'm doing well. And white really doesn't have anything. There's no pressure from this bishop. It's obviously trapped. The only pressure he has is some rook pressure down the d file. But what can you do with it? And basically nothing. And so white moves his bishop to b5 like I anticipated, because what else to do? But if he takes this knight's not the best knight. I'll let him take it if I can get a bishop. So that's one of the drawbacks. It's easily kickable is another drawback. I can move a rook here. I could probably push a pawn and try to create problems for this bishop. I could also kick the bishop. I could also go here. See, if I had more time, I could actually think about these moves and the consequences and which are, better and blah, blah, blah. But also there's so many potential moves, so you could kind of do what you want. I'm going to bring a rook here. I guess I'll bring another piece into the game with a threat. The threat is the pawn. If he moves the pawn, then when I take here and he takes here, it's a weird pawn structure. It does open his rook though. So maybe I just leave the bishop there, but then now I can reroute, so probably not. If I take and he takes, what do I do about this pawn? I could go here. I could also just get behind it. I could also sack it. Where else can this knight go? I'm gonna take it. I don't really see the problem. And now this is kind of a dead file, so I am gonna go back. And I could always just push it if I want. I'm up a pawn, and he doesn't have any threats. Okay, so maybe he wants to push this is his idea. But that helps me undouble my pawns. So whatever. Having said that, I do need to get my other rook in the game, and I might as well put it here, right? This file I could, but it's not like I have queens and I'm going to attack him. I barely have any pieces. So the F file looks to be more usable or practical. And I always could move my knight if I want out of this. Or I could try to just take the bishop. I think I'm going to go for the bishop because it could be open potentially. My knight's not necessary. We're getting close to an end game and it's going to take forever to like get from one side of the board to the other. So he does this, which is obviously not a good move because it doesn't threaten anything and it's super slow. I don't know what that's about. I'm going to kick the bishop and just ask the question. Can't hurt to ask the question. He goes here, which targets this pawn, which allows me to gain more space with tempo. So now he goes here, but this allows me to improve my knight with tempo, right? Because he doesn't have threats. So now he finally settles here, but I got to improve my position a lot, in the meantime. So I'm happy to see that. And now that this pawn's here and our pawns are here, his king is more vulnerable. That's one thing. I also could push stuff in the center. But I'm running out of time, which is annoying. So which plan should I go for? I'm going to get rid of my backwards looking h6 pawn because it looks kind of weak like that. and I'm going to try to improve it. He plays here. What does this threaten? My knight. The drawback is it severely weakens this c pawn irreparably. Whereas I could just reroute my knight. So how do I want to reroute it? Let's just go back here because it gives us these squares, and now I could swing a rook here. I could attack that pawn, but I want to maybe improve my knight first, get it here so that it's only one move away. So he moves his bishop, which threatens to push and potentially hit this pawn, but I see it, and I'm also going to ignore it and counterattack the pawn in front of his king. I'm trying to talk it fast because I'm running low on time. Okay, so he defends it with his king, but now I'm going to improve my knight and go for this, which looks very strong. So he pushes the pawn. What does this threaten? Some pawns, and like I said, this one, I could push past it, but then he can take and ruin my structure. I couldn't double my pawns. If I undouble and he takes this way, I could push past then. But these are kind of strong in the center. It's not a big deal. If I just ignore him, I'm going to ignore him only because these threats come with check. So they're not just threats, like he gets a pawn, then I get a pawn. It's like he'll get a pawn, I'll get a pawn with check, and then I can keep doing stuff. Because if I give him back the turn, like let's say he gets the pawn, one of these, and then I get a pawn, but it's his turn to create threats, I don't like that. Okay, so I do this, he takes a timeout. What does this threaten? It just defends the pawn, drawback, disconnects the back rank, slightly precarious, and then now I can kick it by going here, which blocks one of his threats with the bishop, comes with tempo on the rook. Rook can't stay in contact with this pawn unless it goes to a light square, which allows me to kick it again, which means it cannot stay in contact. However, before I do that, I'm also noticing I have this alignment because this is pinned. And so instead of kicking the rook and winning the pawn, I'm going to take a different pawn and win a whole rook, ending the game. So now with a minute and 30 on my clock, I feel much better about this game. About converting, easy conversion. So now he takes a pawn. What does this threaten? Just to break down my center. I'm just going to recapture with the knight, keeping my pawn cover against my king. He puts some pressure on the e-file. That's the threat, but he can't ever do anything unless he takes the knight. So I'm going to push my pawn. He takes it. I did this for one reason, just to open my rook and get it in the game. I don't want it babysitting pawns. And again, this can't be kicked by a pawn or a dark bishop, which means it's permanent here if I want it. So he moves his bishop, blocks his own rook. Little weird, kinda. I'm just gonna attack this pawn because I have a minute left and I can't think. Okay, how do I do this? I have a minute. This is fancy and I'm not calculating, but intuitively maybe it works. He took a knight, I took a bishop, he takes a pawn. So he gets a pawn out of that, but I'm up a rook, so I'm fine. And now I'm gonna go for his king. Which rook? Let's try this rook. He goes up. I give him a check. He goes down, but now there's a checkmating net. Okay, cool. I love checkmating nets with these rooks. So he just completely ignores my threats because it looks like I pushed the pawn to push further pawns. But actually I did this to cut these squares out from his king so that when I bring my rook here, it's checkmate. Voila. Beautiful checkmate. Overall, very nice game. Takeaways: if you play white, this is not a good variation. Just don't trade the queens. Just play a normal game with the queens on the board. If you're black, don't be afraid of this because this is good for black, practically speaking. Because white generally does something like this, which is not the best move. And is that probably even an inaccuracy? Because at the end of the day, it looks like it's pressuring this pawn, but in reality, down all the lines, white never gets to take this pawn, which means that pressure doesn't matter, and it blocks his f pawn, which in many of the best lines you're pushing that f pawn. So this ends up not, but you don't know that unless you study this as white. So most people don't, and they end up playing this, and so you get good positions with black. And if they ever go for stuff like this, like, it doesn't matter. They love doubling the pawns, but again, it's not good because we get this fortress style thing here, and it's impenetrable. Like, it's just impenetrable. So it ends up being good because there are no actual weaknesses. It's solid as a rock. And so yeah, the rest of the game, at this point, it's already won. So once you get this pawn and he has this bishop, the game's over. You just have to technically convert from here, which a lot of you need practice, myself included, need practice, especially the lower time. You want to be faster at it, so you have to just play some games. So we got, 5 points from Anna's because they were a little lower rated, but I think this was a great game to showcase again another game in the queen trade Philidor line where black ends up winning in a nice fashion without ever really being in trouble, right? So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully you'll give the Philidor line a try, and hopefully you'll submit a rapid or classical game that I can review. Good luck in your games. Goodbye.